Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Oh, I like that. Reminds me of the old days in the classroom. So welcome to the Life Odyssey. We're so pleased that we have Ray and Ellen Coppock here to share the moments of their lives that they'd like to tell us about and to look back on that landscape and tell us what they see. And before we get into that, I just want to talk a little bit about how you might be more comfortable here and what's going to happen today so you know what to anticipate. I do not see anybody here that doesn't know where the restroom is, so I'm not even going to mention that. And I see that a lot of you have helped yourself to snacks, so that's important. And so please continue to make yourselves comfortable in that way. And the first part of our program will be Ray and Ellen speaking, each taking a turn to talk about their lives, kind of a thumbnail sketch to catch us up and get us oriented about their lives. And that's helpful too, just to let you know when you need a little bit more volume. And after that, and so during that part where they're sharing a little bit about how the flow of their life has been and what they'd like to let us know right in the beginning, we won't be asking questions during that time. That is your time to just speak uninterruptedly. But after that, there'll be a question and answer time where I will get to lead some focused questions. And both Ray and Ellen wanted to invite you all to ask questions also, or to make a comment. So there'll be time during that question and answer section. I'll let you know when it is, so that you all can contribute to the conversation. Okay. And they would like to introduce a special guest or two that are here today.
Oh. Our daughter Susan, right over there. She's the one that takes care of us and plays the harp at church, things like that. We're really glad to have her here. Oh, let's do that. We are from the Glacier Circle community, and what I ask all of my friends, no, everybody from Glacier Circle, please raise your hand. Is this okay for my talking?
Great.
In the back?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'd like to just mention, we are being videotaped. So if there are questions or comments coming from the audience, it may be that I'll need to repeat it or hand you a microphone so that you are on the videotape. Okay, so just a little heads up about that. And did I? Oh. And Kathy's reminding me that the videotape picks up ambient sound, so especially if you're near the camera, if you could keep the noise down and the rustling, that would help us. We're trying to record history here. We're trying to make sure we have something that we can look at, and these copies of these DVDs will be given to the families and the people that are up here, letting us interview them.
That means no applause.
No boobs?
So anything I'm forgetting? Are we good? Okay, all right. So it's, even though it looks a little formal, it's actually rather informal. We all know each other here. So I think we'll start. Ellen was going to start talking about her life, and she's on the spot here.
Well, most of you know I had a pacemaker put in just a couple days ago, so I wanted to tell you that.
Can you hear?
Not too well. Did you hear that?
Okay, is that better? I had an echocardiogram on Tuesday, and on Thursday I had a pacemaker. So I guess it was kind of urgent. Anyway, I thought I'd feel just wonderful as soon as they got that thing in my chest. But it hasn't happened that fast. I'm really pretty weak and tired. But I don't feel sick or anything, so that's enough of that. Shall I talk about that first?
Sure.
All right. Well, I was born in Glendale, California, Southern California, and a couple years before the Depression started. And I feel that Depression made a big difference in my life, more than it should have. But the reason is that my dad had a job as a bank teller and didn't really make very much money. And when the Depression came along, he just was very happy to have any kind of a job. And so he didn't try to get a better paying job then. And we were really very poor until World War II came along. And all the young men went off and everybody that was left got paid more. And so, and the thing about it was that every time I wanted anything, the answer was always, we can't afford it. And I really didn't have a lot of things that a lot of my friends had. And I got a very bad feeling of deprivation. And I really haven't had enough money till I was about 40 years old. And so it's pretty deeply ingrained. But you know, frankly, I had an epiphany when I was thinking about giving this talk. And that was, I realized, and I should have realized this years ago, that it never held me back socially. We were always very respected people in the community, and I always had lots of friends. And so I shouldn't have felt that deprivation, but I did. And I think I'm going to feel better for the rest of my life. We'll see how long that is, but anyway. So one of the big goals of me, and I had a brother and a sister. Younger, I was the oldest. Well, the big goal in my life as I was just growing up was to go to college. And so you can imagine with very little money in the family that it was quite a big goal. But my mother had gone to college and my dad didn't, but he surely would have liked to. So when I graduated from high school, I worked a year instead of going right on to college because I needed the money, and I was able to save $1,000, which was a lot of money in those days. And then I went to Glendale City College for 2 years. All because, I had good grades and all that stuff, but that was free. And then I went to the University of California, Cal, for 2 years. And I worked in the summers, of course, but I didn't work while I was actually going to college. My parents wanted me to have a nice social life, and I sure did. And I had lots of dates. It was really fun. And well, one thing that happened, by the time I graduated from college, I majored in psychology, which I think was a mistake, really, but anyway, I had applied for the grad school in sociology or social welfare, whatever it was called, and accepted, but I was completely out of money, completely. So I went home and lived with my parents and got a job at the Tulare County Health Department, and I was the statistician. And it was a pretty interesting job. And I had been, the last year of college, I was engaged to a fellow. And so I came home and got a job, and then I was going to get married. And But we broke up after I'd had my picture in the paper and all that bit. So anyway, I knew Ray because our families were good friends. And we had been pretty good friends in college, and I had ridden back and forth to school with him. So we knew each other pretty well. So after I broke up with this fellow, I called Ray, or I sent him a note, and he started courting, and we were married within 6 months. And it's a good marriage. And our families, our backgrounds are much more similar than the fellow I had been engaged to. So I think that would have been a very bad marriage. So it worked out well. Well, I'll stop and let Ray talk for a while, and then I have a little more to say. So, okay.
When my first memories are of the Mojave Desert. That's where I grew up as a kid. We moved there when I was 4 or 5 years old. I don't have much memory before that, after that. We lived on, my parents were school teachers. They were both Quakers, and they'd both been to the Quaker Friends College in Wichita, Kansas, and got married right after they graduated. And the story is that they went to the Bay Area when they came out west. Like, remember, my dad from a big family, they all had to go somewhere. He came out here. They went across the mountains and saw the desert and never seen one before. And there were these strange patterns on the ground. They went down to find what they were. It turns out they were ranches that had been abandoned when Los Angeles took all the water. And as they got there, they found out that the school board was meeting that night and they needed 2 teachers. And they took the job. And the story in the family is that my folks spent the night up at a spring up on the mountain up there in sleeping bags, and a rattlesnake crawled over my mother's sleeping bag, and she still took the job. Anyhow, we grew up in the desert. It was a very close situation because we were quite isolated, several miles to the nearest family, nearest farm. I liked going to school. We had a very close family situation. We all drove to school together and back home together. But I liked going to school. During the summer times, we went into the high country, and I loved that, and that's lasted ever since. My family went to church at the local Methodist church. There was no Quaker church. And one of the things I think that shaped me, looking back, is that religion in the conventional sense was never mentioned at home. My parents never talked about going to heaven or going to hell or any of that. I suppose that's what may have been some of that at the church, but I didn't pay any attention. So I grew up in a situation where values were very important. You did what's right, you never lied, you always were responsible, and all those things. But it had nothing to do with heaven or hell. And I think that made a big impact on me. So, when I was 11 or 12 years old, the family took a trip for more than a year around the world, all the way around. That was unusual in those days, and I can't quite explain how it happened, except that my father always wanted to go somewhere and have an adventure. He must have been that way as a kid. Anyhow, somehow they got the money, and we spent 12, 13 months going around the world, just the 4 of us. And that too sort of tightened the family up, as you can imagine. So when we get back, I immediately got into the 10th grade in a big city school at Eagle Rock, which was quite a change because I had never had much to do with girls or dates or social events of any kind. I did okay academically, I could handle that, but socially I was a bit of a loner. I had no dates or girlfriends. A few months after I got into high school, my mother died rather suddenly, which was a shock. And my brother and I lived with our grandparents in a small house in Eagle Rock for several days. My father, my brother, and I worked the summer wheat harvest in Texas for 3 years, which was a good experience because I'd had to work on my father's ranch. He grew alfalfa and pigs and had a cow and chickens and all that. And I had to milk the cow and help with a lot of things. I'd never worked from the beginning of a day to the end of the day before. And that was a learning experience. And so I did that with the wheat harvest. In early 1941, after high school, I worked for a year, again like Ellen, and saved some money. Then I went into UCLA in 1941. And in the beginning of 1941, and was doing reasonably well, but guess what? The war started, and pretty quick I'm in the Army. And this is because I was in ROTC, and they told us in ROTC that if you want to be an officer in ROTC, you get $25 a month. Big deal. So I signed up for $25 a month. And it turned out that put me in the U.S. Army, so I never had to worry about the draft. On the other hand, another aspect of my story is that for some reason I was taking a night course in riveting, putting rivets through 2 sheets of aluminum like you do in an airplane. The instructor said, I can get you a job at Lockheed. And I knew then that I was going to go in the infantry. And it took me about 10 seconds to choose the infantry because it was, from the point of view of someone my age, 18 or so, it was a lot more interesting than going to a factory and doing these rivets for years. And believe me, it was more interesting. Anyhow, I got basic training and went to officers candidate school, became a second lieutenant, was assigned to the 69th Infantry Division, more training in Mississippi, and then we were shipped to Europe and went into the fighting way at the end of the war. Within a few days after the end of the Battle of the Bulge, we went into the Ardennes forest where the Battle of the Bulge had been fought. And it was so recent that the German bodies were still lying around, but the Americans had all been picked up. Anyhow, we stayed there, we went north, and spent some time at the Siegfried Line, and had some combat experience there. And then we went all across southern Germany in the spring of 1945, this is, and we were the first outfit to meet the Russians at the Elbe River. So that's my job, by the way, in the infantry was reconnaissance patrolling. I had a small group of men, and we'd go out and see where the enemy is. Okay, the war was a turning point for me. At that age, it was good for my confidence, and I got promoted and decorated. And at that particular age, the masculine skills in the Army are a big deal. And so I developed a lot of confidence along those lines. It didn't help much with women, but it really got me in good shape on the male side of it. So I got out and went to Berkeley and got a degree in journalism. I'd always wanted to be a writer. I didn't know what I wanted to be. I read Mark Twain,
and I loved that, and I wanted to write like that. So I got a degree in journalism. I worked for United Press in Fresno and in Madera, which then got well, I should back up. When I got out of school, out of Berkeley, I was offered a job in Fresno with a agricultural magazine of all things, which I wanted nothing to do with that time. Or to go to San Francisco, the big city where you're supposed to go when you're a young reporter, right? So I go to San Francisco. About 3 months later, the trial of Tokyo Rose came up in San Francisco court, where I was assigned to be the reporter. And my boss realized that in about 2 days, in about a day or two, they transferred me to Fresno. And I hated San Francisco, I realized, and I loved Fresno. So that was a really good thing that happened to me. Then I went and got a job on a small paper, which is a wonderful place for a young reporter to be, is on a small town paper. You get to know people and you get to do all kinds of stuff. That was nice. Then we got married, and Ellen has told you, she and I drove back and forth to Berkeley together, and I got to be comfortable with her, which was something new for me in social life. And as she said, she was engaged to somebody else, and then we both went to work, and then we got together later and got married in July of 1949. For the next 6 or 8 years, we had a good life of a young married couple in small towns, Madera, Merced, and Davis. And I got promoted in the newspaper business, and we went to church in order to have, and had a social life that way with the other young couples. I was reporter and editor for Madera, Merced, and Sacramento newspapers. Then I went to work at UC Davis, and this was it. I was on the staff of Agricultural Extension, and for almost 40 years after that, a long stretch, I did writing and editing with the faculty on campus, agricultural and environmental research and that sort of thing, and with the county extension staff, and with administrators and that sort of thing. My main job was to kind of translate technical language into plain English for various uses. But this is a lot trickier than newspaper writing. Newspaper writing, no one ever talks to you much after you've written a story. You just have to go write another one. But if you're working with the science faculty over here, it's tricky because a lot of them have already been burned by newspaper reporters, and that you have to be good. Their assignments are literally of letting somebody else describe their work. But over time, I learned how to get the facts right at first, and also write well at the same time. And I got a reputation on the Davis campus for doing that. So over 40 years, I felt a lot of satisfaction from that. I had lots of friends and acquaintances on the campus. And that's pretty much my working life. Meanwhile, of course, we're married, kids are growing up, everybody's getting older. The one thing that sticks to me about the family is, and it reflects my own life as a kid, something about being in the high country, in the mountains together, camping, really creates a memory that you'll remember later with the kids. I remember Susan being about this high, carrying a little pack, but she always wanted more weight in her pack. And she was always up in front of us, charging away. And so were the other kids. The memories of that are really good. It's good for a family. I recommend every family get up in the mountains and get away from the house for a while. Okay, where are we? Meanwhile, in those years, one thing that happened was the Unitarian Church here. When I grew up, I didn't do much with church, but when I got married, we went to church largely for social reasons. But up here, when the kids got old enough to start coming home and asking questions about Sunday school, we decided it's time to make a change. We heard about the Unitarians, and we went there, and it clicked. We were not the founders exactly, but we joined a couple of months after they had got organized. And this church gave me, for the first time, I think, a sense of participating in a community, a bigger group of people who you have a special relation with. I don't think it had happened before. The small community I grew up with, they were all grown-ups and I was a kid, so, that wasn't the same. And I also got a chance to be a board member and a board chair and on ministerial search committees and other committees, work parties, even conduct a couple of Sunday services. All of this sort of really has been very important, sort of an anchor in my life since that time. Also, it made me think about the less tangible aspects of living, spiritual life or emotional life, which I'd never paid that much attention to. And that helped, especially as the church changed over the years and got different ways of looking at things. But along with the church, at this time, no, not this time, when I retired in the 80s sometime, I took a class in poetry and it really clicked. And I found out that my writing that I had learned for 40 years of writing, clear writing, was some help, I guess, but the poem speaks for you in a way that I've never done before. And I was very tentative at first, but then I got a lot of good feedback, and that helps. So that it was a new experience, and I felt listened to. And I got some poems published and had a chapbook and that sort of thing. So poetry was important to me, and when I was in my late 60s and on, even before that, I had been for every week in a dream group led by Nancy Jungerman. Nancy. And so once a week for, I don't know how many years, 40 years or so, I could remember my dreams. We'd go and talk about them. And that too takes you out of your professional self in a way that was very helpful to me. And then another thing was that by more or less accident, the church used to go to Dillon Beach every Thanksgiving, and we'd have sing-alongs at almost every night we're there, and that I was singing. And it turned out from that four of us were asked, Mark Foya and Cap Thompson and Chip Northup, Chip and I were asked to sing at an event of some kind, and they said, okay, what's the name of your group? And we said, really kind of with tongue-in-cheek, Pewter Creek Crawdads. And it's still going, it's 40 years later. And that is another way in which I could get out of my professional self and even out of my domestic self, and just sort of let go. And it's been lots of fun and also very satisfying over the years. Okay, and then meanwhile, one of the best things that happened was, as I said, was being a part of this congregation. Okay, I think I'll stop there.
Should we give a chance for questions? Or should we-
Well, part of the plan was that they were going to maybe talk a little bit more about after you were married. Ellen, did you want to do that?
All right.
And then we can break for questions after that.
All right.
Okay.
Well, we had our babies. The first one when we lived in Madeira was Stan, our oldest son. And then when we moved to Merced, we had David. And then when we moved to Davis, we had Susan. And so we had a nice family.
And I actually have a photo
Oh, look.
of them with their little ones. This is a surprise to them that I have this, I think. Oops, sorry about that. That's not the photo. So this is your family. And where is this, in Davis?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's indeed.
That little car, by the way, is a Fiat 500. Oh. It's the smallest car they ever made. And then 6 months ago or so, and 6 months or so ago, the Fiat company made another version of the Fiat 500. I haven't seen one, but it was really small.
And in the valley towns I lived in, my social life was the American Association of University Women. And then when we got to Davis, they didn't have an association of university women, and which was disappointing to me because that's how I made most of my good friends. But Evelyn Kazmaier, who you probably all know, and Sandy Motley, and I, but really Evelyn Kazmaier got the League of Women Voters going. And so I think I was vice president. Sandy Motley lived down the street from me, and she was president. And Evelyn, even though she's a wonderful worker, she never wanted to be president. She certainly should have been. And I could have been president too, but I just didn't want to either. So anyway, the League of Women Voters took a lot of my time, and in fact I worked so hard I decided, gee, I might as well have a job and make some money. So I went back to and took a year of college at Davis and got my teacher's credential. And then I taught first grade at, well, I should say, that was a hard year because I had all my work at home to do and go to school and take care of the kids and do homework. And I just did my homework lickety-split and never looked back. And so, but it was kind of fun. It was the last year you could drive on campus. And I had the little Fiat to drive around and go over there and park in the street and go to my classes. So anyway, I taught at West Davis Elementary, which is now Cesar Chavez. And I did that for 3 years. And then Ray was promoted to be the top of his, what would you call it? Anyway,
Information group.
of the information group, and we were going to move to Berkeley. But that was just the time of the riots down there and the tear gas and all that bit. And so he decided that he'd commute and we'd stay in Davis a while longer. For one thing, our older son has had a lot of problems, and it would not have been a good place to take him. Oh, and so then I had sort of resigned from teaching, but then I went back and asked, well, could I have my job back? But I'd like a part-time job. And so I worked with Hannah Bauer. I was a reading specialist for a little bit, and then I was taught learning disability groups. And that was very nice. You took the children out of class in groups of 1 or 2 and taught them for half an hour or an hour in the areas where they needed special help. And that went on for quite a while, and then I went to the junior high school and had a classroom and different classes, and to have no more than 8 children in a class at one time. But it was still quite a little bit more difficult than taking one child out and working with them. But the junior high school was an interesting experience. And so I think I did that for about 3 years. And then when I was 55, I retired. And so I wondered, well, what am I going to do with my time? So I took up watercolor painting. And these paintings above us are 4 of my paintings. Let's see. Well, the one of Mendocino, I can't seem to see it, was one of the first paintings I ever did. And it was, I took a class at Mendocino Art Center, took a week-long class. And see, most of these pictures I did when I was in a class or two. I did lots and lots of workshops. It was just a lot of fun to go for a week or a 3-day weekend with some famous watercolor artist. And I got pretty good. I've sold and given a lot of my paintings, and I think a lot of you in this room have a painting of mine. And
Raise your hand if you have a painting.
see, quite a few. And so it's always fun to go into somebody's house and look at that picture, and I think, oh, that's mine. And it feels really good. I really enjoy those years. And then it got to the point where, well, what do you do with them? You used to have a party every summer, and I'd hang all my paintings on the fence, and we'd have wonderful refreshments, and the crawdads would sing, and my children would sing. And it was always a nice party. I was glad when I sold them, but really the point was to show them to people, because I like to share them, and I like to be complimented, just like everybody would. Oh, and I play tennis, and I got several people going in watercolor that probably never would have. Betty Berteau had majored in music at college, but she wasn't doing anything. You probably know her. She's a pretty famous artist. I used to play tennis with her and told her about my art, and she said, well, she'd like to start in again, and so she was doing watercolor with me. She's turned into quite a famous artist, I think. And Mildred Franklin, I don't suppose any of you know her, and Marie Colvin, all those people. Marie Colvin had a painting at our cabin, that picture of Dillon Beach. That one at the far right is the Golden Lakes.
Yeah, Gold Lakes Basin.
Gold Lakes Basin, and the next one is from the Ghost Town, Taos area. No,
Oh, that was the New Mexico business.
yeah, in New Mexico. And what's the one that's over there?
That's the Mendocino one, and the
Okay.
end one is Dillon Beach.
Yeah, Dillon Beach has been a great love of ours. We've gone there every year for years and years and years. We got started going when the other Unitarians went there at Thanksgiving time, and we bought a trailer over there down by the landing with 2 other couples, and had that for a while, and then we bought a cabin in the mountains later with 4 other people, 4 other families, and then we bought a cabin at Dillon Beach with 2 other families, 2 or 3 other families. And of course the reason we were able to have all those cabins, I mean, they were one at a time, believe me, was because we couldn't afford them ourselves, but we bought them with other people, and it always just worked out really well. So we were never afraid to do it. And it's the same with Glacier Circle. You know, we were used to sharing with other people in our endeavors, and it's been a great thing for us.
Is this a good time to start asking some questions? Okay?
Sure.
Okay, 'cause I think you're up to the present pretty much. So I'm going to ask, this is open to the audience here, and I'm going to start off, and then we'll follow up, and just raise your hand, and we'll probably need to ask you to come up if we can't hear you, or I will repeat your question. So thinking back, I know when we were talking in your home, you had some wonderful memories about early Davis, what it was like, and also the early church, what was happening and how you were involved right when you joined our church. Are you, something about Sunday school, and yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about that, Ellen, how that was happening?
Well, Sunday school,
In the Unitarian Church.
Sunday school in the Unitarian Church was, when I came, was in different people's homes. And people would drop their child off at that home and then go on to church. And then after church, come back and get their kids. And about the second year we were here, I taught second grade at,
Girl Scout camp?
Was it Girl Scout cabin, or
no,
somebody's
no,
home?
Joyce.
Oh, Joyce.
But it's Joyce Takahashi now, at their house. But it works out. You don't get to go to church for a whole year or the whole time you do it. So that was, but I really had fun. Jimmy Kaneko was in my class. And probably some other children that still go to this church, or whose parents do.
And Ray, do you remember what were the details about when you first moved in Davis? It was something like you could see off into the horizon.
One of the best decisions I ever made in my life was the two houses we could have afforded when I went to work for the Sacramento Bee was one in East Sacramento over Carmichael or something. The other one was in Davis. And at that time, I wasn't aware of what would be the big difference. So I came out here, and the house on 12th Street was just being built, and it was the right price, and everything looked good, and I bought it, and boy, was it a good decision.
And it was on the outside of town, is that right?
It was at the north edge of town. It's on 12th Street, and between us and Woodland, there was nothing but farms and jackrabbits. And then they built the school out there, and the kids would go by our lot to get out to the school.
We could see the train coming from
We could see the train coming for miles. And a couple times a pheasant flew into our yard and things like that. But now, if you look on a map, we are exactly in the middle of town at that house. It's going north and south and east and west.
And I remember you said you were there to see the first traffic light being put into Davis.
The first traffic light in Davis was at the corner of B, not at the corner of B and Russell, where now there's a huge traffic light, but a little bit out B, there was a junior high school on the east side of B Street. So they put a traffic light up so that the kids could go back and forth. That was Davis's first traffic light, and then they went from there.
So that's in the 50s? When was that?
No, well, we came in 56 to Davis, so it was probably about 58. Davis was about 8,000 people then.
I would, just to change the subject briefly, about the church. In my personal life, there were some kind of role models. I was young middle-aged when I got here. But there were, some of you will remember John Conrad and Glenn Birch, who was a close friend, and Herb Bauer, even at that time.
There he is.
There's Herb.
There he is.
And those three were the most impressive people to be involved in a church and running the church to a large extent. We have a meeting, you know, and they were the ones that I really was impressed by.
Well, we were impressed by Mr. Hildebrand.
You're hit the switch.
Hildebrand gave some wonderful talks in those days, too.
Yeah.
Well, I was chairman of the Board of Trustees. Ray was chairman about 3 times over the years, and I was chairman fairly early, and a couple of things of interest might be said. Soon after I was elected to be chairman, and nobody else would do it, so I had to do it. Bob Singhouse announced she was leaving, which was a big blow. And so quite a bit of my term was, well, we didn't have an interim minister that time, but Ray stepped in and helped a lot. And but anyway, one of the things that happened when I was chairman, we let Longview School use our facilities during the week. And you know, Bob Singhouse had been a lawyer, but he let me just, by word of mouth, loan that, rent that place to Longview School without a contract or anything. I look back now with horror. And a couple of things bad did happen. One of the kids jumped in the piano that was in the Bridge House and ruined it. And but we spent the money on a good thing. We built all the paths. We had all the paths built.
So all those paths that come off the bridge house and go all around, are those the paths?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And they've lasted all these years.
And you were also the chair when this library.
Oh yeah, Ray and I were on the committee. Let's see, is anybody else here who was on the committee?
Over here.
Okay. Well, I can take credit for looking at the plans and saying, well, why don't we make it a bigger room? And so I expect it was probably first planned to stop right there.
About half the size, right?
So it just changed the whole church when this building was open. We had lots of nice meetings here, as you know, and it's always felt good in here. And I had a lot to do, as many of you I'm sure did, helping the builder. I hung the wallpaper with Dorothy Floydick there in the lobby, and I hung the wallpaper with Gail, I think, in the bathroom. Or maybe it was still you. And what else did I do? Oh, I picked out the colors in here. And a lot of people seem to hate those lines, but I thought they looked fine.
And I remember Ray being on the roof, because it was a do-it-yourself. Remember, we all were chipping in labor to make this happen. That's how we afforded it.
Well, Ray had just retired when they started building this building. He practically lived out here. And I think you probably all know how hard Ray has worked, you know, at this church. Lots more than I have, but of course I've contributed to not having him at home, so.
And I'm wondering, maybe this more might be yours, Ray, but you were both involved in this church during some controversial years. I remember the Vietnam situation was one of the things that happened. And how did we manage to weather that controversy?
Well, I remember 2 or 3 times when we had a big issue within the congregation. A lot of you will remember this. But I think maybe the most drastic or the most painful what had to do during the Vietnam War was whether the church should officially become a refuge for people who were avoiding the draft. A lot of churches were doing that, and there was a lot of push here too. But there was a small group who were really offended by that because it was clearly illegal. So we had a lot of discussions, and we finally had a vote, and the vote to become a sanctuary won by a pretty large margin. But what I've remembered ever since was that I guess a few people left the church. I was told, I didn't know them, but at the meeting, or maybe the next meeting, there were several of the people who had been against it sitting together, and they sort of stood up and said, look, we don't like what's going on here, but we're not leaving this church. And I remember thinking that the community of the church is more important than any divisive issue. And that's what they thought, and that's what really impressed me.
Thank you.
Well, I think that was the worst controversy the church ever had. And I do remember some of the people that left, and I felt really bad about it. And other controversies like passing the plate and some of those other things have never been near as serious as that first controversy.
Now's a good time. Does anybody have any questions, comments, or Corinne?
I want to ask Ray, what about your acting? Have you no